the rifle barrel pressed cold against his temple. "Sign the paper, Bridger." Nathaniel didn't move. Around him, 10 hired guns. Behind him, the shack everyone called worthless. Beneath that shack, a secret worth killing for. 3 days ago, they'd buried his father, the richest man in Wyoming territory. Everyone expected Nathaniel to inherit the empire. Instead, he got 40 acres of dirt and a rusted key. The whole town laughed, until he used that key, found what his father had hidden, discovered why men were willing to murder. Now the corporation wanted it, wanted the land, the water, the future. They offered gold. He refused. They offered threats. He still refused. So they came with guns. "Last chance," the man said. Nathaniel smiled. "You're standing on my property. I suggest you leave." The gun cocked. This is the story of how a worthless inheritance became a war, and how one man held the line. When everyone else would have sold, the snow came down heavy that morning. Heavy and silent. The kind of silence that makes a man remember every mistake he ever made. Nathaniel Bridger stood at the edge of the cemetery, 50 yards back from the crowd, far enough that no one would expect him to speak, close enough to see his father's coffin being lowered into frozen ground. The wind cut through his buckskin coat like it had a personal grudge. He didn't move. Hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Just watched. Because that's what you do when the man who raised you is being buried and you haven't spoken to him in 5 years. You watch. And you wonder if he knew, if he understood why you left. The crowd was bigger than Nate expected. Trappers, traders, men who'd worked the mountains with Ezra Bridger back when Wyoming territory was still wild enough to kill you for being careless. Old men, mostly. Gray beards and worn faces. Hands that had held rifles longer than they'd held anything gentle. They stood in a half circle around the grave, hats off despite the cold. Because Ezra Bridger wasn't just another trader. He was the man who'd built Fort Blackwood's largest trading post from nothing. From beaver pelts and determination and a kind of stubbornness that only made sense out here, where everything wanted you dead. Near the front of the crowd stood Cordelia Ashwood. That's what she called herself now. Cordelia Bridger, technically. Ezra's second wife. She wore black. Expensive black. The kind of fabric that didn't belong in a place like this. Too fine. Too clean. Her face was calm. Almost serene. Like she was attending a Sunday service instead of burying a husband. Her son stood beside her. Merritt Ashwood. 26 years old and dressed like he'd just stepped out of a St. Louis parlor. Vest. Pocket watch. Boots so polished they caught the weak winter sun. He leaned against the cemetery fence. Casual. Like he was waiting for a stagecoach instead of watching a man get buried. His eyes scanned the crowd, pausing on faces, lingering on the old trappers who whispered behind their hands. Then his gaze found Nate, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. The kind that says, "I already won and you don't even know it yet." Nate looked away first. Because he wasn't here to fight. Not today. Today was about Ezra. And the strange, hollow feeling in his chest that might have been grief. Or might have been something else. Something he didn't have a name for. Behind Nate, a horse snorted softly. His horse. A brown gelding with a white star on its forehead and the patience of a saint. The animal shifted its weight, stamped once in the snow. Nate reached back without looking, patted the horse's neck. "I know," he murmured. "I know." The horse huffed, which in horse language probably meant, "Can we leave now?" Nate didn't answer, because the preacher was speaking. Reverend Clark stood at the head of the grave, a thin man with a Bible that looked too big for his hands. His voice carried across the cemetery. Steady, practiced, words about ashes and dust and eternal rest. The same words spoken over every grave, generic, safe. Nothing about who Ezra actually was. Nothing about the man who'd taught Nate how to trap beaver, how to read weather in the shape of clouds, how to survive a Wyoming winter with nothing but a knife and stubbornness. Just ashes, dust, rest. Nate clenched his jaw. The crowd began to disperse once the final prayer ended. Slow at first, then faster as the cold bit through coats and reminded everyone that standing still in Wyoming winter was a good way to lose toes. Cordelia moved through the crowd like she owned it, graceful, composed, shaking hands, accepting condolences with a practiced expression of dignified sorrow. Merritt followed 2 steps behind, playing the dutiful son, though his eyes kept drifting back toward Nate. One of the old trappers broke away from the group. walked slowly toward Nate with the careful gait of a man whose knees had given up on him years ago. Abel Hawkins, 70 years old if he was a day, beard like a snowdrift, eyes sharp as broken glass. He'd worked with Ezra back in the early days, before Fort Blackwood even had a name, before Wyoming Territory was anything but a blank spot on a map that said, "Here be danger." Abel stopped a few feet from Nate, didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at the grave, then at Nate, then back at the grave. "You gonna stand out here all day?" Abel finally asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over wood. Nate shrugged. "Might. Town's got coffee, fire, walls. I'm fine." Abel snorted. "You look fine, real fine, like a statue." "I said I'm fine. And I said you look like a damn statue." Abel shifted his weight. "Your pa wouldn't want you freezing out here." Nate turned his head slightly. "My pa didn't want a lot of things." The words came out sharper than he intended. Abel didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for another minute. The wind picked up, sent snow swirling around their boots. Then Abel spoke again. "They're reading the will today." Nate stiffened. "Today?" "Yep, noon, at the courthouse." "That's fast." Abel shrugged. "Judge Waters wants it settled quick. Says Cordelia's been pushing for it." "Of course she has." "You gonna come?" Nate looked back at the grave, at the fresh earth already disappearing under new snow. "Don't see the point," he said quietly. "Pa made his choice when he married her." Abel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Maybe, maybe not." Nate frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Abel reached into his coat, pulled out something small, held it out, a folded piece of paper, sealed with wax. "Your pa gave me this 2 weeks before he died," Abel said. "Told me to give it to you if anything happened." Nate stared at the paper. Didn't take it. "What is it?" "Hell if I know. Didn't open it. Wasn't addressed to me." Nate still didn't move. Abel sighed, grabbed Nate's hand, pressed the paper into it. "He wanted you to have it," Abel said firmly. "So take it." Nate's fingers closed around the paper. It was cold, stiff from being carried in Abel's coat. He looked down at it. His name was written on the front in his father's handwriting. Blocky letters, uneven, the hand of a man who'd learned to write late in life and never quite gotten comfortable with it. "Come to the reading," Abel said. "Even if you think there's nothing for you, come anyway." "Why?" Abel's expression was unreadable. "Because your pa was a lot of things, but he wasn't careless." Then he turned, walked back toward town without another word. Nate stood alone in the cemetery. The paper felt heavy in his hand, heavier than it should. He broke the wax seal, unfolded it. Inside, just 4 words in his father's writing. "Trust the cabin. Look beneath." Nate read it 3 times. Didn't understand it any better the 3rd time than the first. Trust the cabin. What cabin? Beneath what? He folded the paper, slipped it into his coat. Then he looked at the grave one last time. "What are you trying to tell me, old man?" he whispered. The wind didn't answer. It never did. By the time Nate rode into Fort Blackwood proper, the town was already buzzing. News traveled fast in small places, and the reading of Ezra Bridger's will was news. Big news. The kind of news that made people stop their work and gather in doorways to whisper. Nate tied his horse outside the general store, walked past clusters of townsfolk who went quiet when they saw him, then started whispering the moment he passed. He didn't care. Let them talk. They'd been talking about him since he left 5 years ago anyway. About how he'd abandoned his father, how he'd chosen the wilderness over family, how he was ungrateful, cold, a disappointment. Nate had heard it all, stopped caring about it around year 2. The courthouse was a squat wooden building at the end of Main Street. Not much to look at. 2 stories, narrow windows, a crooked sign that said Wyoming Territory District Court in letters that were starting to peel. Inside, the air was warm. Too warm. A wood stove in the corner pumped out heat like it was trying to compensate for every winter in Wyoming history. The room was packed, standing room only. Trappers, traders, shopkeepers, people who'd worked with Ezra, people who owed Ezra money, people who just wanted to see what happened when a rich man died. At the front of the room sat Judge Thomas Waters, mid-50s, balding, a face like a sun-dried tomato. He wore spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, and he looked deeply, profoundly tired of everyone in the room. Cordelia sat in the front row, Merritt beside her, both perfectly composed, like they already knew how this was going to end. Nate slipped in through the back, found a spot against the wall, tried to be invisible. Abel caught his eye from across the room, nodded once, then Judge Waters cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "All right," Waters said. "Let's get this done." He opened a leather folder, pulled out several sheets of paper. Last will and testament of Ezra Bridger, witnessed and notarized 3 months prior to his death. Someone coughed. Waters ignored it. "To my wife, Cordelia Bridger, I leave the main trading post and all inventory contained within." Cordelia's expression didn't change, but Merritt smiled, small, satisfied. Waters continued, "To her son, Merritt Ashwood, I leave all commercial contracts currently held by Bridger Trading Company, including the exclusive agreement with Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium." A murmur ran through the room. That contract was worth thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Merritt leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, looked like a man who'd just been handed the keys to a kingdom. Waters adjusted his spectacles. "To Abel Hawkins, loyal friend and partner, I leave the sum of $100 in gold." Abel shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew he wouldn't take it. Then Waters paused, looked up from the paper. His eyes found Nate in the back of the room. "And to my son, Nathaniel Bridger." The room went completely still. Every eye turned toward Nate. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Waters continued reading. "I leave the property located at Blackthorn Canyon, 40 acres, including all structures currently standing." Someone in the front row snorted. Not quite a laugh, but close. Waters kept going. "Said property includes 1 cabin, and this." He reached into the folder, pulled out something small, metal, rusted. He held it up. A key, old iron, corroded from years of sitting in a drawer somewhere. The kind of key that opened things people had forgotten about. "1 key to the aforementioned cabin," Waters said, "as per Ezra Bridger's instruction." For a moment, no one said anything. Then Merritt laughed, out loud, sharp and cruel. "A cabin," he said. "That's perfect." He turned in his seat, looked directly at Nate. "Did you hear that, Bridger? Your pa left you a shack." Cordelia placed a hand on Merritt's arm, gentle but firm. "Merritt," she said quietly, "show respect." But her eyes were smiling. Merritt didn't stop. 40 acres of nothing and a pile of rotting wood. Guess the old man finally told the truth about what you're worth." Nate's hands curled into fists. But he didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at Merritt until the younger man looked away. Waters set the key on the table. "Nathaniel Bridger, you need to come sign for this." Nate pushed off the wall, walked slowly through the crowd. People stepped aside, made a path, like he was contagious. He reached the front of the room, stood in front of this judge's table. Waters held out the key. Nate took it. The metal was cold, heavy. "Sign here," Waters said, pushing a ledger across the table. Nate signed his name. Blocky letters, just like his father's. Then he turned to leave. "Hey, Bridger," Merritt called out. Nate stopped, didn't turn around. "If you get tired of that fancy inheritance, I'll buy it off you. $50, cash." Someone in the crowd snickered. Nate turned his head slightly, just enough to see Merritt's smirking face. "Not interested," he said. Merritt shrugged. "Your loss." Outside, the cold hit Nate like a slap. He sucked in a breath, held it, then let it out slowly. Abel appeared beside him a moment later. "That went well," Abel said dryly. Nate didn't answer, just stared at the key in his hand. Abel leaned against the courthouse wall. "You gonna go look at it?" "At what?" "The cabin. The land." Nate turned the key over in his palm. "Why, it's just a shack." "Maybe, maybe not." "You keep saying that." Abel shrugged. "Your pa didn't do things without a reason." "Yeah, well, he didn't do a lot of things." "Like what?" Nate's jaw tightened. "Like tell me why he married that woman." Abel was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe he had his reasons for that too. Or maybe he was lonely and stupid. Could be both. Nate shoved the key into his pocket, started walking toward his horse. Abel called after him. "Where are you going?" "To see what 40 acres of nothing looks like." Abel grinned. "Want company?" Nate paused, then nodded once. "Bring a rifle." "Always do." They rode out of Fort Blackwood an hour later. 2 men, 2 horses, heading northeast into the mountains. The trail was narrow, barely a trail at all, more like a suggestion worn into the landscape by animals and the occasional trapper who didn't mind getting lost. Snow covered everything, made the world quiet, muffled, like riding through a dream. Nate led the way. Abel followed a few yards behind. Neither spoke, because there was nothing to say that the wilderness wouldn't swallow anyway. 3 hours in, they passed a frozen creek. The ice was thick, solid, clear enough to see the stones underneath. Nate's horse picked its way carefully across. Abel's followed without complaint. On the other side, the trees grew denser, pines mostly, tall and dark and close together, the kind of forest that felt older than the mountains themselves. Abel broke the silence. "Last time I was out this way was 15 years ago. What were you doing out here, trapping with your pa, before he built the trading post, back when we were still young enough to be stupid?" Nate glanced back. "You trap anything good?" "Beaver, mostly. Some marten, one grizzly that damn near killed us both." "Sounds about right," Abel chuckled. "Your pa shot that bear 3 times before it went down. Thing was the size of a small barn. He tell you that story?" "Told everyone that story, every time he got drunk." Nate allowed himself a small smile. Then it faded. "He never told me." Abel was quiet. "Well," he said finally, "you weren't around much to hear it." Nate didn't respond, because Abel was right, and there was no point arguing with the truth. 4 hours in, they reached Blackthorn Canyon. It wasn't much of a canyon, more like a wide valley carved between 2 low ridges. A frozen creek wound through the center. Trees lined the edges, and in the middle of it all, barely visible through the snow, a cabin. No, that was generous. A shack. A leaning, sagging, half-collapsed pile of logs that looked like it had been fighting gravity for 20 years and was finally starting to lose. Nate reined his horse to a stop, stared. Abel pulled up beside him, let out a low whistle. "Well," Abel said, "it's standing, technically." Nate said nothing, just stared at the structure. One corner of the roof had caved in completely. The door hung crooked on its hinges. 2 of the windows were broken, and the whole thing leaned to the left like a drunk trying to stay upright. 40 acres, and that," Nate said quietly. Abel dismounted, tied his horse to a half-rotten fence post. "Come on, let's take a look." Nate didn't move. "You coming or not?" Abel called. Nate sighed, then dismounted. They approached the cabin slowly. Abel walked around the perimeter first, checking the walls, the foundation, what was left of the roof. Nate stood in front of the door, pulled out the key, looked at it, then at the door. The door didn't have a lock. The key wasn't for the door. He pushed the door open anyway. It groaned on its hinges, swung inward. The inside smelled like dust and old wood and something else, something damp, but not rot, not exactly. The cabin was 1 room, small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. A broken table sat against one wall. 2 chairs lay on their sides. A stone fireplace filled the far corner, cold and dark, and in the center of the floor, a bearskin rug. Nate stepped inside. His boots creaked on the floorboards. Abel followed. "Well," Abel said, "it's cozy." Nate walked slowly around the room. Everything was covered in dust, except the bearskin. The rug was clean, not pristine, but cleaner than everything else, like someone had brushed it off recently. Nate knelt beside it, ran his hand over the fur, thick, soft, old, but well cared for. "That's strange," he murmured. Abel crouched beside him. "What is this rug? It's too clean. Maybe your pa was out here recently." "Why would he come out here?" Abel shrugged. "Maybe he liked the view." Nate grabbed the edge of the bearskin, pulled it back. Underneath, the floorboards looked different, newer, cut into a square pattern, and in the center of one board, a small hole, just big enough for a finger. Nate and Abel exchanged a look. "Well," Abel said slowly, "that's interesting." Nate slipped his finger into the hole, pulled. Nothing happened. He tried twisting instead. The board turned. Click. A sound like metal sliding against metal. Then the entire section of floor shifted, lifted. A hidden door, hinged on one side, opening upward, revealing a dark space beneath, and a ladder. Metal rungs disappearing down into blackness. Cold air drifted up. Dry. Still. The kind of air that hadn't moved in years. Abel leaned over the opening, peered down. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Nate pulled out the key again, looked at it, then at the dark hole in the floor. "Trust the cabin. Look beneath." "Guess we're going down," Nate said. Abel grinned. "After you." Nate found an old lantern hanging by the fireplace. Still had oil in it. He lit it with a match from his coat pocket. The flame flickered, steadied, cast long shadows across the cabin walls. He held the lantern over the opening. The light showed the ladder descending about 15 feet, and at the bottom, something that shouldn't exist. Not out here, not in the middle of nowhere. Stone walls. Smooth. Too smooth to be natural. "What in the hell?" Abel breathed. Nate put one boot on the ladder, tested his weight. The metal held. "Stay up here," he said. "I'll check it out first." "Like hell I will." "Abel, I'm 70 years old boy. If I fall and break my neck, at least it'll be interesting." Nate sighed, then started climbing down. The ladder was cold. The rungs were spaced evenly. Professionally made, not something thrown together by a trapper with time to kill. Nate descended slowly. The lantern swung from his free hand, sent shadows dancing across the stone walls. Walls that definitely weren't natural. Someone had carved this space, shaped it, built it. His boots hit solid ground, stone floor, smooth like the walls. He raised the lantern and stopped breathing. The chamber was huge, not cabin huge, cave huge, stretching back into darkness beyond the reach of his light. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping water that had frozen into pale columns, and along one wall. Wooden crates, stacked, organized, military precision, metal banded, locked, dozens of them. Abel's boots hit the floor behind him. "Holy mother of—" His voice echoed, came back to them from the darkness. Both men stood frozen, just staring. Nate walked forward slowly. His lantern light fell across the nearest crate. He set the lantern down, grabbed the lid, pulled. It opened, not locked. Inside, gold bars, stacked neatly, gleaming in the lamplight. Each one stamped with a mint mark. Official. Real. Abel leaned over his shoulder, whistled low. "Your pa wasn't just a traitor." Nate opened another crate. Cash. Bundled in leather straps. Hundreds of dollars. Maybe thousands. Another crate. Furs. Prime beaver pelts. Marten. Fox. The kind that sold for a fortune in St. Louis. "This doesn't make sense," Nate said. "Why would he hide this? Maybe he didn't trust banks. This is more than not trusting banks. This is—" He didn't finish, because he didn't have words for what this was. Abel walked deeper into the cave. His footsteps echoed. "Nate, come look at this." Nate grabbed the lantern, followed. At the back of the cave, carved into the stone wall, a natural shelf, and on it, a wooden chest, different from the crates, personal, handmade. Nate approached slowly, set the lantern down, opened the chest. Inside, papers, documents, a leather-bound journal, and on top of everything, an envelope, sealed with wax, his name on the front, in his father's handwriting. Nate picked it up. His hands were shaking. He broke the seal, unfolded the letter inside, and began to read. "Nathaniel, if you're reading this, then I'm dead and you've found the cave. Good. That means you're smarter than you think. I need you to understand something. Cordelia didn't marry me for love. She married me for the trading post, and she didn't do it alone. There's a company, Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium. You've heard of them. Everyone has. They want to control every trading route from here to the Rockies, and they don't care who they have to buy or bury to do it. Cordelia's been working with them for 2 years, since before we got married. Her job was simple. Marry me, wait for me to die, then sell everything to RMFC for a fortune. I figured it out about 6 months ago. Found letters, contracts, plans. But here's the thing they don't know. And here's the thing you need to understand. The trading post isn't worth what they think it's worth. This land is. Blackthorn Canyon sits on top of an underground aquifer. Biggest water source in 100 miles. In this country, water's worth more than gold, more than beaver pelts, more than anything. I registered the water claim 5 years ago, legal and binding, under my name. Whoever owns this land owns the water, and whoever owns the water controls everything. I couldn't leave it to Cordelia. She'd sell it in a heartbeat. So I left it to you. Not because you're my son. Well, not only because you're my son, but because you're the only person I trust not to sell. You left Fort Blackwood because you saw what Cordelia was, what she wanted. You left because you still believe in something bigger than money. I know we haven't spoken in 5 years. I know you're angry. I know you think I chose her over you. Maybe I did, but I chose you in the end. Trust the cabin, Nate. Trust the land. And for God's sake, don't sell it. Your father, Ezra Bridger. Nate read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands stopped shaking, his breathing steadied, and something cold settled in his chest. Not grief, not anger, something else. Understanding. Abel stood beside him, quiet, waiting. Finally, Nate folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, looked at Abel. He knew, Nate said quietly, knew what? Everything. He knew what she was, what she wanted, and he still married her. Why would he do that? Nate looked back at the crates of gold, the furs, the cash, then at the letter in his hand. To buy time, he said, to hide all this, to register the water claim without anyone noticing. Abel let out a slow breath. That's one hell of a long game. Yeah. So what are you going to do? Nate tucked the letter into his coat, next to the note that said, Trust the cabin. Look beneath. I'm going to finish what he started. Abel grinned. Good. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Nate picked up the lantern, started back toward the ladder. Come on. We need to talk to Father Thorn. The priest, why? Nate glanced back. His expression was hard, determined. Because if Cordelia's playing games, we need to know the rules. They climbed back up the ladder, sealed the hidden door, replaced the bearskin rug, left the cabin exactly as they'd found it. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful, cold, indifferent. Nate stood for a moment, looking at the cabin, the valley, the frozen creek. His land now. 40 acres of nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Abel mounted his horse. You coming? Nate nodded, swung into his saddle. They rode back toward Fort Blackwood in silence. But the silence felt different now. Not heavy, not empty. Purposeful. Because Nathaniel Bridger had spent 5 years running from his father's choices, and now he understood. His father hadn't been choosing Cordelia. He'd been choosing him. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dawn came cold and sharp the next morning. The kind of cold that made your lungs ache, made your fingers numb inside gloves, made you question every choice that led you to Wyoming Territory in the first place. Nate stood outside the general store, waiting. The town was just starting to wake, smoke rising from chimneys, a shopkeeper sweeping snow off his front steps, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Normal, peaceful, except nothing was normal anymore, and Nate was about to make sure everyone knew it. Abel appeared around the corner, moving faster than a 70-year-old man had any right to move. His breath came out in white puffs. Father Thorn's at the church, he said. I told him you wanted to see him. What did he say? Said he'd been expecting you. Nate frowned. Expecting me? Abel shrugged. His exact words. They started walking toward the small Catholic church at the edge of town. A wooden structure with a crooked cross on top, paint peeling, windows frosted over. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was warmer. Candles burned along the walls, casting soft light across rough wooden pews. Father Donovan Thorn stood near the altar, mid-50s, gray hair, a face that had seen too much and forgiven even more. He wore simple black robes, a wooden cross around his neck. When he saw Nate, he smiled, not a happy smile, a knowing smile. Nathaniel Bridger, he said. I wondered when you'd come. Nate stopped a few feet away. You've been expecting me. Your father came to see me 3 weeks before he died. The words hit Nate like a punch. What? Father Thorn gestured to a pew. Sit, please. Nate didn't want to sit, wanted to pace, wanted to demand answers. But Abel was already sitting, so Nate sat too. Father Thorn remained standing. Your father asked me to keep records safe, the priest said quietly. Certain records, marriage records specifically. Why? Because he knew someone would come looking for them eventually, and he wanted to make sure they were found. Nate leaned forward. What records? Father Thorn walked to a small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, pulled out a leather-bound book, old, worn, the parish registry. He carried it back, set it on the pew between them, opened it to a marked page. This, he said, pointing. Nate looked down. An entry from 1847, written in careful script. Marriage, Cordelia May Winters to Thaddeus Ashwood, Boston, Massachusetts. May 14, 1847, witnessed by Father Michael O'Brien. Nate stared at the words. Read them again. Ashwood, he said slowly. That's her name. Her real name. Was, Father Thorne corrected. She changed it when she came west. Started calling herself Cordelia Cross. Easier to disappear that way. But she married my father. She did. So she divorced Thaddeus first. Father Thorne was quiet for a moment. Then, did she? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Nate's mind raced. You're saying she didn't divorce him. I'm saying I have no record of a divorce, and neither does any other parish between here and Boston. Your father checked. Abel let out a low whistle. Bigamy. Father Thorne nodded slowly. If Cordelia never legally divorced Thaddeus Ashwood, then her marriage to Ezra Bridger was never valid. Which means she can't inherit, Nate said. Correct. Nate stood up, started pacing. Where's Thaddeus now? Father Thorne closed the registry. That's what your father wanted to know. He hired someone to find out. And last known location was Cheyenne, working as a legal consultant for Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium. The name hit Nate like ice water. RMFC. Yes. So Thaddeus is working for the same company Cordelia's conspiring with. Father Thorne's expression was grim. It would appear they never stopped working together. Nate stopped pacing, turned to face the priest. I need proof. Written proof. Something that holds up in court. Father Thorne tapped the registry. This is proof. Marriage record. No divorce record. That's enough for any judge. But I need Thaddeus. I need him to testify that they never divorced. Then you need to find him. Abel stood up. Cheyenne's 3 days' ride from here. Nate nodded. Then we leave in an hour. Hold on, Father Thorne said. Before you go rushing off, there's something else you should know. Nate turned back. What? Cordelia's been busy. Yesterday she filed a claim with the Territory Land Office, trying to challenge your ownership of Blackthorn Canyon. On what grounds? She's arguing that Ezra was mentally unfit when he wrote the will, that he didn't understand what he was leaving you. Anger flared hot in Nate's chest. That's a lie. I know, but she has lawyers, good ones, paid for by RMFC. How long before the challenge goes through? Father Thorne hesitated. Judge Waters scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks, 14 days, not enough time. But it would have to be. Nate headed for the door. Thank you, Father. Nathaniel. He stopped, turned. Father Thorne was watching him with careful eyes. Your father was a good man, the priest said quietly. He made mistakes. We all do. But everything he did in the end was for you. Nate's throat tightened. He nodded once, then walked out into the cold. They didn't make it an hour before the first problem arrived. Nate was at the stable saddling his horse when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Coming fast. He stepped outside. 6 riders. Coming up Main Street at a gallop. Leading them. Merritt Ashwood. And behind him. 5 men Nate didn't recognize. Hard-looking men. The kind who got paid to look hard. Guns on their hips. Rifles and saddle holsters. They pulled up in front of the stable in a cloud of snow and dust. Merritt dismounted, smiled his practiced smile. Morning, Bridger. Nate said nothing, just watched. Merritt gestured to the men behind him. Brought some friends. Thought we'd take a ride out to Blackthorn Canyon. Make sure the property's secure. Secure from what? Squatters, drifters. You know how it is. Valuable land like that needs protection. It's my land. Merritt's smile didn't waver. For now. But Mother's filed a challenge, so technically ownership's in question, which means we have every right to inspect the property. One of the hired men spat tobacco juice into the snow, grinned, showed teeth like old fence posts. Nate's hand drifted toward his belt, where his knife sat. No gun. He'd left his rifle inside the stable. Stupid, careless. Merritt noticed. His smile widened. Don't do anything foolish, Bridger. These men are here to protect RMFC's interests. Nothing more. RMFC doesn't have any interests in Blackthorn. Not yet, but they will. Once the court rules in Mother's favor, once she sells them the land, then they'll have all the interests in the world. Abel appeared in the stable doorway behind Nate, rifle in hand, not pointing at anyone, not yet, but present. Merritt saw it. His expression hardened. You're making this difficult. Good, Nate said. For a moment no one moved. The hired men watched Abel's rifle. Abel watched them. Nate watched Merritt, and Merritt watched everyone. Then he laughed, short, sharp. "Fine. We'll do this the legal way." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, held it up. "Order from Judge Waters. Says we have the right to inspect the property during the challenge period, to assess its value for the court." Nate's jaw tightened. "When?" "Now." "Now." Merritt shrugged. "Sun's up. We're here. Might as well get it done." He turned to his men. "Let's ride." They wheeled their horses around, started down the street toward the trail that led to Blackthorn. Nate stood frozen, watching them go. Abel lowered his rifle. "That's bad." "I know." "If they find the cave." "I know." Nate ran back into the stable, grabbed his rifle, his coat, his saddlebag. Abel was already mounting his horse. "We going after them, fast as we can." They rode hard, pushing the horses faster than they should, but not fast enough to catch 6 men with a head start. The trail to Blackthorn Canyon was treacherous in winter, narrow, icy. One wrong step could send a horse and its rider tumbling down a slope. But Merritt's group wasn't being careful. They were moving fast, reckless, like they had somewhere to be. By the time Nate and Abel reached the canyon, the sun was fully up. The cabin stood in the center of the valley, still leaning, still half collapsed, still looking like something that should have fallen down years ago. But now it wasn't empty. Merritt and his men had already dismounted. 2 of them were walking around the structure, examining the walls, the roof. One kicked at the foundation, testing its strength. Another peered through the broken windows. Merritt stood in front of the door, arms crossed, waiting. When he saw Nate approaching, he smiled. "There you are. Thought you might not show." Nate dismounted, tied his horse, walked toward the cabin slowly, every muscle in his body tense. "You've inspected it. Now leave." "Not quite done yet." Merritt pushed the cabin door open, stepped inside. His men followed. Nate's heart hammered in his chest. The bearskin rug, the hidden door. If they found it. He forced himself to stay calm, walked to the cabin entrance, stopped just outside. Abel stood beside him, rifle ready. Inside, the men were spreading out, poking at the broken furniture, looking in corners, examining the fireplace. One of them knelt beside the bearskin rug. Nate stopped breathing. The man ran his hand over the fur. "This is good quality," he called out. "Worth something." Merritt walked over, looked down at the rug, then at Nate. "You a hunter, Bridger?" Nate shrugged. "Sometimes." "Kill this yourself?" "My father did." Merritt nodded slowly, then grabbed the edge of the rug, pulled it back. Nate's hand went to his rifle. Merritt looked down at the floorboards underneath, the square pattern, the finger hole. He froze, then looked up, met Nate's eyes, and smiled. "Well, well, well," he said softly. "What do we have here?" Everything happened fast. Merritt reached down, stuck his finger in the hole, twisted. Click. The hidden door began to open. Nate moved, drew his rifle, pointed it at Merritt. "Step away from that." Merritt didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at Nate. "You're pointing a gun at me." "I said step away. You shoot me, you'll hang." "Maybe, but you'll be dead, so who wins?" The hired men reached for their weapons. Abel's rifle swung toward them. "Don't." One word. Calm. Final. The men froze. For a moment the cabin was silent. 6 armed men, 2 rifles pointed at different targets, a hidden door half open, and a secret that could change everything. Then Merritt laughed, straightened up, raised his hands slowly. "Relax, Bridger. I'm not here to rob you." "Then why are you here?" "I told you, inspection." "You've inspected. Now leave." Merritt glanced down at the open door, at the darkness below. "What's down there?" "None of your business. Actually, if the court rules in Mother's favor, it becomes exactly my business." Nate's finger tightened on the trigger. Merritt saw it, took a step back. "Fine. We'll leave." He gestured to his men. "Come on." They filed out slowly, reluctantly, each one giving Nate a long look as they passed. Threats, promises, statements that this wasn't over. Merritt was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway, turned back. "You know what I think," he said quietly. Nate didn't answer. "I think my real father was right about you. You're stubborn, proud, too proud to know when you've lost." "Get out," Merritt smiled. "See you in court, Bridger." Then he was gone. The sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Nate lowered his rifle, His hands were shaking. Abel stepped inside, closed the cabin door. That was close. Too close. He knows something's down there now. I know. He's going to tell Cordelia. I know. Nate walked to the hidden door, stared down into the darkness. We need to move fast, find Thaddeus before they have time to prepare. Abel nodded. Cheyenne. Cheyenne. They sealed the door, replaced the rug, left the cabin as undisturbed as possible. Outside, the valley was quiet again, peaceful, deceptive, because a war had just started, and both sides knew it now. They rode back to Fort Blackwood in silence, packed supplies, ammunition, food, water, everything they'd need for a 3-day ride to Cheyenne and back. Father Thorne met them outside the church before they left. I heard what happened at the cabin. News travels fast. It's a small town. The priest handed Nate a sealed envelope. This is a letter to Father O'Brien in Cheyenne. He keeps records for the territory. If anyone knows where to find Thaddeus Ashwood, it's him. Nate took the envelope. Thank you. Father Thorne placed a hand on Nate's shoulder. Be careful. RMFC has eyes everywhere. If they know you're looking for Thaddeus, they'll try to stop you. Let them try. The priest's expression was grave. I'm serious, Nathaniel. These aren't simple traders. They're a corporation. They have money, power. They don't lose gracefully. Neither do I. Father Thorne sighed, then nodded. Go with God. The ride to Cheyenne took 4 days instead of 3. A snowstorm hit on the second day, forced them to shelter in a cave for 8 hours while the wind screamed outside. When they finally emerged, the world was white, blinding, disorienting. But they kept moving. Cheyenne appeared on the morning of the 4th day, a sprawling town at the base of the mountains, bigger than Fort Blackwood, busier, dirtier, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost in the same afternoon. They found St. Mary's Church near the center of town, a stone building, more substantial than the wooden structures around it. Father O'Brien was older than Father Thorne, maybe 70, bent with age but sharp-eyed. He read Father Thorne's letter carefully, then looked at Nate. Thaddeus Ashwood. You know him. I know of him. He's not a parishioner, but I know where he spends his time. Where? Father O'Brien's expression was disapproving. The Silver Dollar Saloon, 3 blocks east, bottom floor. He's there most nights. Most nights? Every night. Nate exchanged a look with Abel. Thank you, Father. Nathaniel. He turned back. Father O'Brien was watching him with concern. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Ashwood isn't a good man, and he's not alone. RMFC keeps him on a short leash. I'll be careful. I'll pray you will. The Silver Dollar Saloon looked exactly like its name suggested. Expensive, gaudy, designed to separate drunk men from their money as efficiently as possible. Nate and Abel stood across the street, watching, planning. You sure about this? Abel asked. No. Good. Least you're honest. They crossed the street, pushed through the saloon doors. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and noise. Piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses, card games at every table, men drinking away their wages, women in bright dresses moving between tables, smiling, flirting, working. Nate scanned the room, and there, in the back corner, alone at a small table, a man in his 50s, thin, worn, gray hair slicked back, clothes that had been expensive once, now just faded. He held a glass of whiskey, half empty or half full, depending on your perspective. Thaddeus Ashwood. Had to be. Nate walked toward him slowly. Abel followed a few steps behind. Thaddeus didn't look up until Nate stopped in front of his table. Then he raised his eyes, bloodshot, tired. I'm not buying, he said. His voice was rough, broken. I'm not selling. Thaddeus took a drink. Then what do you want? Information. Don't have any. About Cordelia Ashwood. Thaddeus froze, the glass halfway to his lips. Slowly he set it down, looked at Nate properly for the first time. Who are you? Nathaniel Bridger. Recognition flashed across Thaddeus's face, then something else. Fear. Maybe, or regret. Hard to tell. Bridger, he repeated. Ezra Bridger's son. That's right. Thaddeus picked up his glass again, drained it, signaled for another. Sit, he said. If we're going to do this, I need another drink. Nate sat. Abel remained standing, eyes on the room, watching. The bartender brought another whiskey. Thaddeus drank half of it in one swallow, then looked at Nate. What do you want to know about Cordelia? Were you married to her? Yes. Did you divorce her? Thaddeus laughed. Not a happy sound. More like something breaking. Divorce, no. She just left. Middle of the night. Took Merritt. Disappeared. When? 1868. 8 years ago. And you never heard from her again? Got a letter once. 2 years later. Said she'd send divorce papers. Never did. Nate leaned forward. So, legally you're still married? Legally? Thaddeus laughed again. I suppose so. Never thought about it much. You should think about it now. Thaddeus's eyes narrowed. Why? Because she married my father, without divorcing you, which makes that marriage invalid. Thaddeus went very still. Invalid? Yes. Which means she can't inherit his estate. Correct. Thaddeus stared at his glass, silent, thinking. She always was clever, he said quietly. Too clever. She's trying to steal land that belongs to me, land my father left me. I need proof she was never legally married to him. You have proof. Parish records. I have records, but I need you. I need you to testify in court that you never divorced her. Thaddeus looked up sharply. Court? Yes. In Fort Blackwood? Yes. Thaddeus shook his head. Can't do it. Why not? Because I work for RMFC. You know who they are. I do. Then you know what they'd do if I testified against Cordelia, against their interests. They'd fire you. Thaddeus laughed. Dark. Bitter. Fire me, son, they'd kill me. The words hung in the air. Abel shifted behind Nate. Nate kept his eyes on Thaddeus. Is that what they told you? Didn't have to. I've seen what happens to people who cross them. So you're just going to let her get away with it? I'm going to survive. That's all I can do. Nate stood up. Then you're a coward. Thaddeus flinched, but didn't argue. Nate turned to leave, made it 3 steps. Then Thaddeus spoke. She didn't always used to be like this. Nate stopped, didn't turn around. Thaddeus continued. When we got married, she was different, soft, kind. Then Merritt was born. And everything changed. Changed how? I started drinking, lost my job, started hitting her. Nate turned around slowly. Thaddeus was staring at his glass. Wouldn't meet Nate's eyes. I'm not proud of what I did, Thaddeus said quietly. But I was angry, scared, broke, and she was there. Easy target. So she left. She left, took Merritt, and I don't blame her. He finally looked up. But somewhere between leaving me and marrying your father, she became someone else. Someone hard, cold, someone who saw people as things to use. He picked up his glass. Maybe I made her that way. Maybe I'm the reason she is what she is now. That's not my problem. No, it's not. Thaddeus drank. But it's mine, and I have to live with it. Nate walked back to the table, leaned down. You can live with it all you want, but right now I need you to do something about it. I told you. I know what you told me, and I'm telling you this, if you testify, I'll protect you. I'll make sure RMFC can't touch you. How? Because once Cordelia's claim is invalidated, RMFC loses any legal standing to the land. They'll have no reason to come after you. Thaddeus considered this. And if I say no, then Cordelia wins. RMFC gets the land, and you spend the rest of your life working for the same people who helped destroy your marriage. Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. Then, when's the hearing? 10 days from now. 10 days? Yes. Thaddeus closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, something had shifted. All right. Nate blinked. All right. I'll testify. God help me, I'll do it. Relief flooded through Nate. Thank you. Thaddeus held up a hand. But you need to understand something. The moment I walk into that courtroom, I'm a dead man to RMFC. They'll come for me. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. Thaddeus smiled, sad, resigned. I suppose that's all anyone can do. They left the saloon an hour later, Thaddeus with them. He'd packed his few belongings into a worn saddlebag, said goodbye to no one, because there was no one to say goodbye to. They rode back toward Fort Blackwood the next morning, 3 men instead of 2, moving carefully, watching the trail behind them. Because if RMFC discovered what they were doing on the second day, they found out. The ambush came at a narrow pass, high walls on either side, perfect kill zone. Nate was in the lead when he heard it, a sound like a rock falling, except rocks don't fall for no reason. Down! He threw himself off his horse just as the first shot rang out. The bullet hit the canyon wall behind him, sent stone chips flying. Abel dove left. Thaddeus froze. "Get down!" Nate shouted. Another shot, this one closer. Thaddeus finally moved, tumbled off his horse, landed hard in the snow. 3 more shots, coming from above. Nate crawled behind a boulder, drew his rifle, scanned the canyon rim. There. 2 men, maybe 3, positioned on opposite sides of the pass. Professional, coordinated, RMFC men. Had to be. Abel's rifle cracked. One of the ambushers ducked, returned fire. The bullet hit Abel's boulder, ricocheted. "Thaddeus," Nate called. "You hit." "No, stay down." Another volley of shots, louder now, angrier. They weren't trying to scare anymore, they were trying to kill. Nate aimed carefully, fired, missed. The shooter above ducked anyway, gave Abel time to move, shift position, get a better angle. Abel's next shot didn't miss. A man screamed, fell, hit the canyon floor 20 feet away, didn't move after. The other shooters hesitated, then opened fire. Wild, desperate, covering each other. Nate counted the shots. 4, 5, 6. Then a pause. Reloading. He moved, sprinted across the open space to a better position. Bullets chased him, hit the snow, the rocks, everywhere but him. He dove behind cover, came up shooting. This time he hit something. A man cried out, dropped his rifle, slipped, slid down the canyon wall, left a red streak behind him. 1 shooter left. Nate could hear him breathing, harsh, panicked. Then footsteps, running, getting farther away. Abel stood up. "He's running." "Let him go." They waited 5 minutes, 10, making sure it wasn't a trick. Finally Nate stood, walked slowly toward the fallen men, both dead. One from Abel's shot, the other from blood loss. Nate recognized neither of them, but their rifles were new, expensive, and each man wore a leather cord around his neck. A small brass medallion hung from each cord, stamped with initials, RMFC. "Company men," Abel said. Nate nodded, looked at Thaddeus. The older man was pale, shaking. "I told you," Thaddeus said. "I told you they'd come." "They came. We survived. This time. We'll survive next time, too." Thaddeus didn't look convinced, but he mounted his horse anyway. They rode on. Faster now, because the third shooter would report back, and RMFC would send more men. They reached Fort Blackwood on the morning of the 7th day, rode straight to Father Thorn's church. The priest took one look at them, dirty, exhausted, blood-stained, and ushered them inside. "What happened?" "RMFC happened," Nate said. He told the story quickly. The ambush, the dead men, the escape. Father Thorn's face grew graver with each sentence. "This is worse than I thought." "How much worse can it get?" "The hearing is in 3 days. If RMFC is willing to kill to stop you from testifying, they won't hesitate to do worse." "Like what?" "Like burning this church down with all of us inside." The words were cold, factual, not exaggeration. Nate looked at Thaddeus. The older man sat slumped in a pew, exhausted, terrified, but still here. "We need protection," Nate said. "From who? The law?" Father Thorn shook his head. "Judge Waters is in RMFC's pocket. The sheriff won't cross them. Then we protect ourselves." 3 men against a corporation. 4, Abel said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." Father Thorn sighed. "I suppose that makes 5, though I'm not much use in a fight." "You can pray," Abel said. "I can do that." The next 3 days were the longest of Nate's life. They stayed in the church, kept watch in shifts, waited for RMFC to make their next move. On the 2nd day, Merritt came, alone this time. No hired guns, no threats. He knocked politely on the church door. Father Thorn answered. Merritt smiled his practiced smile. "Is Nathaniel Bridger here?" "What do you want, Merritt?" "Just to talk." "He doesn't want to talk to you." "Tell him it's important." Father Thorn looked back. Nate nodded, stepped forward. Merritt's smile widened when he saw him. "Bridger, you look terrible. Say what you came to say." Merritt's smile faded. "Mother wants to make a deal." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." "Don't need to." Merritt stepped closer. "She'll drop the challenge. Let you keep Blackthorn, all of it. No questions asked." Nate frowned. In exchange for what? Water rights. Sign them over to RMFC. Keep the land. Give up the water. No. Think about it. I said no. Merritt's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Not the first time. RMFC isn't going to stop. You know that, right? They'll keep coming. Keep pushing. Eventually you'll break. Maybe, but not today. Merritt stared at him for a long moment, then turned to leave. Paused, looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I didn't know. About Thaddeus. About the bigamy. Mother never told me. Doesn't change anything. I know, but I thought you should know. Then he was gone. Nate closed the door. Abel appeared beside him. Think he was telling the truth? Doesn't matter. Might matter to him. Nate thought about that. About Merritt growing up with Cordelia as a mother. About watching her lie and scheme and manipulate. About learning to survive in that world. Maybe Abel was right. Maybe it mattered to Merritt. But Nate couldn't afford to care. Not yet. Not until this was over. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. Perfect weather for a fight. The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken. Standing room only along the walls. Everyone in Fort Blackwood had come to watch. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power. About whether a corporation could come into their territory and take whatever it wanted. Judge Waters sat at his bench, looking uncomfortable, nervous, like a man who knew he was about to make enemies no matter what he decided. Cordelia sat in the front row, Merritt beside her, both perfectly composed. Cordelia wore black again, mourning clothes, playing the grieving widow. Behind them sat 3 lawyers, expensive suits, leather briefcases, RMFC's finest. Across the aisle, Nate, Abel, Father Thorne, and Thaddeus Ashwood, who looked like he might throw up at any moment. Judge Waters cleared his throat. Let's begin. The courtroom fell silent. Waters adjusted his spectacles. We're here to address the challenge filed by Mrs. Cordelia Bridger regarding the will of Ezra Bridger, specifically the bequest of Blackthorn Canyon to Nathaniel Bridger. His voice was steady, practiced, but his hands shook slightly when he lifted the papers. Cordelia's lead attorney stood, a tall man with silver hair and a suit that cost more than most people's horses. Your Honor, we contend that Ezra Bridger was not of sound mind when he drafted this will, that he did not understand the true value of what he was leaving to his estranged son. Estranged. The word hit Nate like a slap. True, though. Can't argue with true. The attorney continued. We have testimony from multiple witnesses that Mr. Bridger was confused in his final months, forgetful, making poor business decisions. His judgment was clearly compromised. Judge Waters nodded. And you have these witnesses present? We do, Your Honor. 3 men stood from the back of the room. Trappers. Men Nate recognized. Men who'd worked for his father, or claimed to. One by one they took the stand, said the same things. Ezra forgot meetings, repeated himself, seemed distant, confused. The last witness, an old trapper named Sykes, spoke with particular conviction. He wasn't himself those last months. Kept talking about water, obsessed with it, said it was worth more than gold, more than anything. The attorney smiled. Obsessed, you said? Yes, sir. Couldn't talk about nothing else. And this seemed unusual to you? Very unusual. Man owns the biggest trading post in the territory and all he can talk about is water. That ain't right. The attorney turned to Judge Waters. Obsession, Your Honor. Classic sign of mental decline. Waters wrote something down, nodded, didn't look at Nate. The attorney sat. Cordelia remained perfectly still, face serene, like she was watching a play she'd already seen, knew how it ended. Judge Waters looked across the aisle. Mr. Bridger, do you have representation? Nate stood. No, Your Honor. Speaking for myself. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Waters frowned. You understand you're at a significant disadvantage? I understand. Very well. Do you have any witnesses? I do. Then call your first witness. Nate looked at Father Thorne. The priest stood, walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. All of it. Nothing but. Nate approached slowly. Father Thorne, how long did you know my father? 20 years. And in those 20 years, did you ever see him exhibit signs of mental decline? No. Did he ever seem confused to you? Never. When was the last time you spoke with him? 3 weeks before he died. And how did he seem? Father Thorne smiled slightly, sharp as ever. We discussed theology, politics, the price of beaver pelts. He was lucid, focused, very much in control of his faculties. Did he mention the will? He did. Cordelia's attorney shot to his feet. Objection, hearsay. Judge Waters looked at Father Thorne. What exactly did he say? Father Thorne met the judge's eyes. He said he'd made arrangements, that his son would be taken care of, that Cordelia would get what she deserved. The courtroom went silent. Cordelia's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened in her lap, just slightly. Nate saw it. What she deserved, he repeated. Did he explain what he meant by that? No, but he smiled when he said it. Objection, the attorney said again. Speculation. Sustained, Waters said. The witness will stick to facts. Father Thorne nodded. Nate stepped back. No further questions. The attorney stood for cross-examination. Father Thorne, you're a friend of the Bridger family, are you not? I was a friend to Ezra? Yes. And you performed his marriage to Mrs. Bridger? I did. So you have a vested interest in protecting his reputation. Father Thorne's expression hardened. I have a vested interest in the truth. The truth as you see it. The truth as it is. The attorney smiled thinly. No further questions. Father Thorne stepped down, walked back to his seat. Judge Waters looked at Nate. Next witness. Nate's heart hammered. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. I call Thaddeus Ashwood. The courtroom erupted. Voices, gasps, confusion. Cordelia stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is... Sit down, Mrs. Bridger, Waters said sharply. She sat, but her eyes never left Thaddeus as he walked slowly to the stand. He looked smaller somehow, older, like the walk from his seat to the witness box had aged him 10 years. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore his oath. His voice shook. Nate approached. State your name for the record. Thaddeus William Ashwood. And your relationship to Cordelia Bridger. Thaddeus looked at her. She stared back. No emotion, no recognition, nothing. I'm her husband, Thaddeus said quietly. The courtroom exploded, shouting, chaos. Waters banged his gavel. Order, order in this court. It took 3 minutes for the room to settle. When it finally did, every eye was on Thaddeus. Waters leaned forward. Mr. Ashwood, are you saying you're married to the woman sitting there? Yes, Your Honor. And when did this marriage take place? May 14th, 1847, Boston, Massachusetts. Waters looked at Cordelia, then at her attorneys. They were whispering frantically among themselves. Mrs. Bridger, is this true? Cordelia stood, composed, calm, like she'd expected this. Your Honor, Mr. Ashwood and I were married, yes, but we divorced years ago. When... I don't recall the exact date, but it was finalized before I married Ezra. Nate pulled a document from his coat, walked it to the judge. Your Honor, this is the official marriage registry from St. Michael's Parish in Boston. It shows Cordelia Winters marrying Thaddeus Ashwood in 1847. Waters examined it. And the divorce decree? There isn't one. Excuse me. There is no divorce on record anywhere. Not in Boston, not in Wyoming Territory, not anywhere between. Waters looked at Cordelia's attorneys. Is this true? The lead attorney stood. Your Honor, we'd like to request a recess too. Is this true or not? The attorney hesitated. We have not yet located the divorce decree, but because it doesn't exist, Nate said. Waters removed his spectacles, rubbed his eyes, put them back on. Mrs. Bridger, if you never divorced Mr. Ashwood, then your marriage to Ezra Bridger was not legal. This is absurd, Cordelia said. Some clerical error. It's not an error, Thaddeus said. His voice was stronger now, steadier. We never divorced. You left in the middle of the night, took Merritt, said you'd send papers. You never did. Cordelia's mask finally cracked. Just for a second. A flash of anger. Cold, sharp. Then it was gone, replaced by something worse. Calculation. She turned to Merritt, whispered something. Merritt's face went pale. He shook his head. She whispered again, more insistent. He stood abruptly. I need air, then walked out, fast, like the room was on fire, and he was the only one who could see the flames. Cordelia watched him go, then turned back to the judge. Your Honor, even if there was some irregularity with the marriage, it doesn't change the fact that Ezra was not mentally competent when he wrote his will. Actually, Nate said. It changes everything. Nate pulled another document, the water rights claim, registered 5 years before Ezra married Cordelia. This is a legal claim to the water rights of Blackthorn Canyon, filed by Ezra Bridger in 1870, 5 years before you entered his life, Mrs. Bridger. He handed it to Waters. My father knew exactly what he was doing. He secured the water rights long before you came along, and he made sure they'd stay in the family. Waters examined the document, read it carefully. This appears to be in order. Cordelia's attorney stood. Your Honor, the validity of the water claim is irrelevant to— It's entirely relevant, Nate said, because it proves my father was thinking clearly, planning ahead, protecting his legacy. He turned to face the courtroom. Ezra Bridger wasn't confused. He wasn't obsessed. He was careful. And he knew that the woman he married only wanted one thing. He looked at Cordelia. Money. She met his eyes, smiled. Prove it. Nate pulled out his father's letter, the one from the cave. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence. He handed it to Waters. The judge read it, slowly. His expression grew graver with each line. When he finished, he looked at Cordelia. Mrs. Bridger, this letter makes some very serious accusations against you, including conspiracy with Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium to defraud this estate. That letter proves nothing, she said. It's the paranoid ramblings of a dying man. It's dated 3 months before he died, Waters said, and it's remarkably coherent. He was already declining by then. That's not what the witnesses say. Your witnesses all say the decline happened in his last month. Cordelia's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I've heard enough. Waters stood. The courtroom fell silent. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Cordelia Winters Ashwood was still legally married to Thaddeus Ashwood at the time of her marriage to Ezra Bridger. Therefore, that marriage is invalid under territorial law. Cordelia stood. Your Honor, I— Sit down, Mrs. Ashwood. The name hit her like a slap. She sat. Waters continued. As the marriage was invalid, Mrs. Ashwood has no legal claim to any part of Ezra Bridger's estate. The will stands as written. Nathaniel Bridger is the sole heir. The courtroom erupted again, this time in cheers, applause. Nate stood frozen. Couldn't quite believe it. Abel clapped him on the shoulder. You did it, son. Father Thorne was smiling. Even Thaddeus looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted. Waters banged his gavel. Order, this court is adjourned. He stood, left through the back door, fast, like he wanted to be gone before anyone could ask questions. Smart man. Cordelia remained seated, staring straight ahead. Her attorneys gathered their papers, whispering, already planning their next move, because lawyers always have a next move. Then she stood, turned, walked past Nate without a word, her head high, back straight, defeated, but not broken. Not yet. At the door she paused, looked back, met Nate's eyes. This isn't over. Then she was gone. Outside, the town was celebrating. Word had spread fast. David beat Goliath. Small man beat the corporation. Justice won. For once. People shook Nate's hand, slapped his back, offered to buy him drinks. He smiled, nodded, accepted congratulations. But inside he felt nothing. Empty. Hollow. Like he'd won the battle but couldn't remember why he'd been fighting. Abel found him an hour later, sitting alone on the steps of the church. You all right? Nate shrugged. Shouldn't I be? Just won your inheritance, exposed a fraud, became a local hero. Yeah, you should be all right. Don't feel like a hero? Heroes rarely do. Abel sat beside him. They watched the sun sink lower, painting the snow gold, then orange, then red. What happens now? Nate asked. Now you go home, rebuild, live your life. Blackthorn. It's yours. Never wanted it. No, but you got it anyway. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Nate thought about the cave, the gold, the water, the responsibility. Pa said the water's worth more than gold. He was right. Said whoever controls the water controls everything. Also right. Nate looked at Abel. I don't want to control everything. Abel smiled. Then don't. Share it. Like your pa intended. How do you know what he intended? Because I knew him. Better than almost anyone. And Ezra Bridger never hoarded anything in his life, except maybe regrets. The words settled between them. Heavy. True. You think he regretted marrying her? Nate asked. I think he regretted a lot of things, but not leaving you that land. That night Nate couldn't sleep. Lay awake in the small room above the stable, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his father, about Cordelia, about the look on Merritt's face when he'd walked out of the courtroom. Shame, maybe, or something close to it. Around midnight, someone knocked on the door. Quiet, hesitant. Nate sat up, grabbed his knife. "Who is it?" "Merritt." Nate froze, then stood, walked to the door, opened it slowly. Merritt stood in the hallway. No coat, no hat, just standing there in the cold, looking lost. "What do you want?" "To talk." "We've got nothing to talk about. Please." The word sounded foreign coming from Merritt, like he'd never said it before. Wasn't sure how. Nate stepped aside. Merritt entered, stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. Nate closed the door, waited. Finally Merritt spoke. "I didn't know. About Thaddeus. About any of it. The bigamy, the water, RMFC. He looked at Nate. "She never told me." "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm telling you the truth." Merritt's voice cracked. "I thought she loved him. Your father. I thought we were building something. A family. A future. You weren't. I know that now." Silence. Merritt sat on the edge of the bed, put his head in his hands. "She used me. Used everyone. And I was too blind to see it." Nate leaned against the wall. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. Leave, I suppose. Can't stay here." "Why not?" Merritt looked up. "Are you serious? You didn't do anything wrong. I helped her, tried to intimidate you, brought those men to the cabin. Because you thought you were protecting your mother's interests. That's not a crime." "Feels like one." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what my father told me once, before everything went bad?" Merritt shook his head. "He said every man makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after. And what am I supposed to do?" "That's up to you." Merritt stood, walked to the door, paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it." "I know." Merritt nodded, then left. Nate listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, wondered if he'd just made a mistake, trusting someone who'd tried to take everything from him. But his father's words echoed in his mind. What matters is what you do after. He'd have to wait and see. 3 days later, Nate rode back to Blackthorn Canyon. Abel came with him. So did Silas Webb. The old prospector had appeared at the stable that morning. Said he wanted to help. Said the canyon was too important to leave unprotected. Said he didn't have anywhere else to be anyway. So now there were 3 of them. 3 men against whatever came next. The cabin looked the same. Still leaning. Still half collapsed. But somehow different now. Like it was waiting for something. They spent the first day clearing debris, fixing what could be fixed, making the place livable, or as livable as a half-rotten cabin could be. The second day they opened the cave, showed Silas what was inside. The old prospector whistled low. "I'll be damned." "You knew about the water," Nate said. "Suspected. Didn't know it was this big." They stood in the cave, surrounded by Ezra's legacy, gold, cash, furs, and beneath it all, water, the real treasure. "What are you going to do with it?" Silas asked. Nate thought about his father's letter, about the people in Fort Blackwood, the trappers, the traders, the families trying to survive in a hard land. "Share it," Abel grinned. "Knew you'd say that." They started small, built a simple pump system, nothing fancy, just enough to bring water up from the underground source. Then they dug channels, shallow trenches that ran from the canyon toward the nearest settlements. It took weeks, hard work, backbreaking. But slowly, the water began to flow. And with it, life. Grass grew where there'd been only snow and dead earth. Animals returned, deer, elk, even a few beaver. Trappers who'd been struggling started catching pelts again. Families who'd been rationing water could finally drink their fill. And Blackthorn Canyon became something it had never been before. Home. One morning Nate woke to voices outside. He grabbed his rifle, looked out the window. A dozen people stood in the valley. Men, women, children, from Fort Blackwood, from the outlying settlements. They'd come bearing gifts, lumber, nails, food, tools. "We heard what you're doing," one of them said. "Figured you could use help." Nate lowered his rifle, stepped outside. "You don't have to." "We want to." So they worked, together. The cabin was torn down, rebuilt from the foundation up. Proper this time, strong, sturdy, a real home. Not just for Nate, but for anyone who needed it. They built a barn, a storage shed, fences, turned the canyon into something resembling a proper ranch, and through it all the water flowed. Children played in the creek, women washed clothes on the banks, men filled barrels to take back to their families. Laughter echoed through the valley, something Nate hadn't heard in years, maybe ever. One afternoon an old woman approached him, weathered face, kind eyes. She took his hand. "My husband died 2 winters ago. Drought killed our cattle. I thought I'd have to leave. Go back east." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you brought the water back. My land's green again. My garden's growing. I can stay." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, son. You saved my home." Nate's throat tightened. "I didn't do it alone." "Maybe not. But you started it. That's what matters." She walked away, left Nate standing in the afternoon sun, surrounded by the sound of hammers and saws and voices, the sound of a community building something together. Abel appeared beside him. "Not bad for a pile of rotten wood." Nate smiled. "Not bad at all. Your pa would be proud." "You think?" "I know." They stood in silence, watching the work, the life, the hope. Then Abel spoke again. "Got a visitor yesterday." "Who?" "Merritt." Nate turned. "What did he want?" "Said he's leaving, heading east, starting over." "Good for him." "He asked me to give you something." Abel handed Nate an envelope. Inside a short letter. "Nate, I don't expect you to forgive me. Don't think I'd forgive me. But I wanted you to know I'm trying. To be better. To be the kind of man your father thought I could be. For what it's worth, he was a good man. Better than I deserved. Better than my mother deserved. I hope Blackthorn becomes everything you want it to be. Merritt." Nate folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket. "Think we'll see him again?" Abel asked. "Maybe. Maybe not." "Would you want to?" Nate thought about it. "Yeah, I think I would." That evening Nate returned to the cave. Alone. He'd been putting it off. Afraid. Though he couldn't say of what. He descended the ladder, lit the lantern. The cave looked the same. Crates of gold, piles of cash, his father's journal, and in the back, the wooden chest. Nate had opened it once, found the letter, but he'd never looked deeper. Now he knelt, opened the chest fully. Beneath the papers and documents, something wrapped in cloth. He lifted it carefully, unwrapped it. A photograph. Old, faded, but clear enough. A woman, young, beautiful, dark hair, kind eyes, holding a baby. Nate's throat tightened. His mother, and him, before everything, before the sickness that took her, before the loneliness that followed. He turned the photograph over, words written on the back in his father's hand. "Sarah and Nathaniel, our beginning." Nate sat on the cold stone floor, held the photograph, and cried. Not from grief, not exactly. From something else. Relief, maybe, or understanding. His father hadn't forgotten, hadn't stopped loving, had just been protecting the only thing he had left, his son. The tears came harder, for all the lost years, for all the words unspoken, for all the distance that had seemed insurmountable, but wasn't, had never been. Because Ezra Bridger had loved his son, in the only way he knew how, by preparing, by planning, by making sure that when the wolves came, his boy would have something to fight with. Nate wiped his eyes, stood, tucked the photograph carefully into his coat, next to his father's letter. Then he climbed back up into the evening light. The piece lasted 3 weeks. Then RMFC made their final play. It started with riders, 10 of them, maybe more, coming down the trail toward Blackthorn, not sneaking, not hiding, coming straight on, like they owned the place. Nate saw them from the ridge, shouted down to Abel and Silas. "Trouble coming." By the time the riders reached the canyon, Nate had gathered everyone, not just Abel and Silas, but the families who'd been working there, 20 people, maybe 30, men with rifles, women with determination, even a few older boys who looked ready to fight. The riders pulled up 50 yards from the cabin, leading them, a man Nate had never seen, tall, well-dressed, expensive coat, silver hair, eyes like ice. Josiah Tremaine, CEO of Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium. Had to be. The man dismounted slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. Nathaniel Bridger. His voice carried across the valley, smooth, cultured, Dangerous. That's me. Tremaine walked forward, alone. His men stayed mounted, hands near their weapons, but not drawn, not yet. I'm Josiah Tremaine, Rocky Mountain Fur Consortium. Perhaps you've heard of us. I have. Then you know we're not in the habit of losing. There's a first time for everything. Tremaine smiled, cold, calculated. I'm here to make you an offer, one last offer. He pulled a document from his coat. $100,000, gold, for the water rights to Blackthorn Canyon. Gasps from the crowd behind Nate. 100,000, a fortune, enough money to live like a king for the rest of his life. Tremaine held out the paper. Sign this, take the money, walk away. Nate didn't move. And what happens to everyone else? The families who depend on this water. That's not your concern. You'll be rich. It is my concern. They're my neighbors. Tremaine's smile faded. Mr. Bridger, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Good. $100,000. More money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. All you have to do is sign. Nate looked back at the people standing behind him. The old woman who'd thanked him. The families with children. The trappers who were finally catching beaver again. He looked back at Tremaine. No. Tremaine's expression hardened. I see. He turned, walked back toward his horse, mounted. That's unfortunate, Mr. Bridger. Very unfortunate. He gestured to his men. Gentlemen, the hired guns drew their weapons. Everything happened at once. The RMFC men raised their rifles. Nate's people scattered, diving for cover behind the barn, the cabin, the wagons. The first shot rang out, hit the ground near Nate's feet. He dove behind a water trough, drew his rifle. Abel was already firing. His shot hit one of the riders. The man screamed, fell from his horse. Then it was chaos. Gunfire from both sides, smoke, shouting, the crack of rifles echoing off the canyon walls. Nate aimed, fired, missed, aimed again. This time he hit something. A rider jerked, slumped, but didn't fall. More shots. A bullet hit the trough, sent splinters flying. Another hit the cabin wall behind Nate. He rolled left, came up shooting. Silas was firing from the barn window. Methodical, calm. Each shot counted. Another rider fell. Then another. The RMFC men realized they'd underestimated. These weren't just farmers. These were frontiersmen. People who'd survived winters and drought and wildlife. People who knew how to fight. Tremaine shouted something. His men began to retreat, backing their horses up, still firing, but moving away now. Nate stood. Hold your fire. His people stopped shooting, watched the RMFC riders disappear back down the trail, leaving 3 men behind, dead, or close to it. The canyon fell silent, except for the ringing in everyone's ears, and the heavy breathing, and the realization that they'd just won. Nate walked slowly to the fallen men. None of them were going to make it. One was already gone. The other 2 wouldn't last long. Abel approached. We should get the sheriff. The sheriff won't come, not against RMFC. Then what do we do? Nate looked at the bodies, then at his people. No one was celebrating. This wasn't victory, this was survival. And survival wasn't something you celebrated, it was something you endured. We bury them, Nate said. Then we prepare for the next time. You think they'll come back? Nate looked toward the trail where Tremaine had disappeared. Yeah, they'll come back. But they didn't. Not that day, not the next week, not the month after that. Because word spread fast about the battle at Blackthorn Canyon, about how ordinary people stood up to a corporation and won. Other settlements heard, other trappers, other families, and they started asking questions about RMFC's business practices, about their land acquisitions, about the people they'd displaced. The territorial government started investigating, newspapers started writing stories, and suddenly RMFC wasn't invincible anymore. They were just another corporation, with lawyers and problems, and a reputation that was starting to crack. Spring came to Blackthorn Canyon. The snow melted. The creek ran full and strong. The valley turned green, greener than anyone could remember. The cabin was finished, sturdy, warm. A real home now. The barn was full of supplies, tools, food, equipment for the pump system. The water flowed steadily to 15 different families now, maybe 20. More asked every week. Nate never said no. One afternoon he stood on the ridge above the canyon, looking down at what they'd built. Not just buildings, but something bigger, a community, a future. Abel appeared beside him, moving slower these days, age catching up, but still sharp, still present. Beautiful, isn't it? Nate nodded. Yeah, it is. Your pa knew what this place could be. He did. They stood in silence, watching the children play near the creek, watching the women tend gardens, watching the men work on the new storage shed. Life, continuing, growing. You ever think about what comes next? Abel asked. Next. You're 28, still young. This place could use a woman's touch, some children. Nate smiled. You sound like you're trying to marry me off. Someone has to. You're no good at it yourself. Maybe I like it this way. Maybe. But your pa built this place for family, not just you, all of us. Nate thought about that. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Good women don't wait forever. Abel walked away, left Nate on the ridge, alone with his thoughts, and the photograph in his pocket, his mother and father, before everything changed, before loss and grief and distance, just two people building something together. Maybe Abel was right. Maybe this place was meant for more than just survival. Maybe it was meant for life, real life, the kind that included laughter and children and futures. But that was a thought for another day. Right now, he had work to do. A week later, Thaddeus came to say goodbye. He looked better than he had in Cheyenne, cleaner, steadier, sober. I'm heading north, he said. Montana Territory. Heard they need surveyors. That what you're going to do? Figure I'll try. Been running from my past long enough. Time to build something new. Nate nodded. Good luck. Thaddeus hesitated. I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. You made them right yourself. All I did was give you the opportunity. That's more than most people would have done. They shook hands, firm, final. If you're ever up Montana way, Thaddeus said, look me up. I will. Thaddeus mounted his horse, looked back at the canyon. This is good land, good water. Don't let anyone take it from you. I won't. And Nathaniel? Yeah. Your father would be proud of all of this, of you. Then he rode away, disappeared up the trail. Just another traveler heading north, looking for redemption, or at least a fresh start. Nate watched him go, hoped he'd find what he was looking for. Everyone deserved that chance, even broken men, especially broken men. That night, Nate returned to the cave one last time. He'd been avoiding it. The chest, the journal, his father's final words. But it was time. He descended the ladder, lit the lantern, walked to the back. The wooden chest sat where it always had, patient, waiting. Nate opened it, moved aside the papers he'd already read, and there, at the very bottom, another envelope, sealed, with his name on it, in his father's handwriting, but different somehow, shakier, like it had been written later, when the sickness was already taking hold. Nate broke the seal, unfolded the letter inside. Nathaniel, if you're reading this, then everything went according to plan. You found the cave. You fought for the land. You won. I'm proud of you, son. I know I never said that enough when I was alive. Never knew how. Words were never my strength, but I want you to know it now. I'm proud of the man you became, not because you did what I wanted, but because you did what was right. When I married Cordelia, I knew you'd leave, knew you'd see through her, and I knew it would hurt you, thinking I chose her over you. But I didn't. I chose to protect what mattered most. This land, this water, this future. And I chose to trust that you'd come back when the time was right. Because you're your mother's son as much as you're mine. She would have loved what you're building here. The community, the life, the hope. That's what she always wanted. Not riches, not power, just people helping each other, living together, building together. You're doing that now, and I'm so proud. Live well, Nathaniel. Love fiercely. And remember, the value of a man isn't measured in gold or land or water. It's measured in the lives he touches, the people he helps, the legacy he leaves behind. You're building that legacy now, and it's beautiful. Your father, Ezra Bridger, P.S. Your mother's wedding ring is in the small leather pouch at the bottom of this chest. When you find the right woman, I hope you'll give it to her. Tell her it belonged to someone who understood what real love looks like, someone who would have loved you both. Nate read the letter 3 times. Then he set it down carefully, reached into the chest, found the leather pouch, opened it. Inside, a simple gold band, worn smooth, scratched from years of wear. But beautiful. Perfect. He held it up to the lantern light. Imagined his mother wearing it, working beside his father, building their first home, their first life, together. Nate closed his hand around the ring, felt its weight, not heavy, but substantial, real. He tucked it into his pocket, next to the photograph, next to his father's letters, all the pieces of a life, a family, a legacy. Then he climbed back up the ladder, for the last time, because he didn't need to come back here anymore. Everything he needed was already with him. 2 years passed like water flowing downhill, steady, constant, unstoppable. Blackthorn Canyon Ranch became the heart of the northern settlements, not the biggest, not the richest, but the most important, because it was the source of water, of hope, of community. Nate married that second spring, a woman named Elizabeth. She'd come west with her brother's family, homesteaders from Pennsylvania, strong, smart, unimpressed by his reputation, which made him love her more. They married in the canyon. Father Thorne officiated. Abel gave her away, because her father was dead, and Abel was the closest thing Nate had to family. The whole community came, everyone who'd helped build, who'd fought, who'd stayed. They danced by the creek, ate until they couldn't eat anymore, told stories about Ezra, about the early days, about how a rusted key and a collapsing shack changed everything. Elizabeth wore his mother's ring, and when Nate slipped it on her finger, he whispered what his father had told him to say. This belonged to someone who understood what real love looks like. She cried. So did he, and Abel, and half the damn canyon. Because it wasn't just a wedding, it was a promise. That the future would be better than the past. That love could grow even in hard soil. That family wasn't always blood, sometimes it was choice, and work, and commitment. By the end of the second year, Elizabeth was pregnant. A boy, the midwife predicted, though no one could be sure. Nate built a cradle, used wood from the original cabin, the one that had been falling apart, the one everyone had laughed at. Now it was part of something new, something that would last. One evening, Nate stood on the ridge, looking down at the canyon, Elizabeth beside him, her hand on her swollen belly. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About my father. What he'd think of all this. I think he'd be happy." "Yeah. He left you something worth protecting, and you protected it. Then you shared it. That's what he wanted." Nate pulled out the photograph, showed it to her. "That's your mother." "Yeah. And me. Before." Elizabeth studied it carefully. She was beautiful. She was. You have her eyes. Nate had never noticed, but looking at the photo now, he saw it, the same shape, the same color. "I guess I do." Elizabeth took his hand. "If we have a girl, can we name her Sarah?" Nate's throat tightened. "I'd like that." They stood together, watching the sun set over the canyon, over the life they'd built, the life his father had made possible, by trusting, by planning, by believing that his son would do the right thing, even when the right thing was hard. 10 years later, Nathaniel Bridger stood in the same spot on the ridge, older now, gray starting to show in his beard, lines around his eyes from years of sun and wind, but strong, steady. Beside him stood his son, 8 years old, named William, after his grandfather. The boy looked up. "Pa, tell me again about great-grandpa Ezra." Nate smiled. "What do you want to know? How he built all this?" Nate knelt down. So he was eye level with his son. He didn't build it alone. He had help, friends, people he trusted. Like Uncle Abel. Like Uncle Abel. Abel had died the previous winter, peacefully, in his sleep. At 78 years old, they'd buried him on the ridge, where he could watch over the canyon, forever. "Great-grandpa left you this land," William said, "even though everyone thought it was worthless." That's right. But it wasn't worthless. No, it was the most valuable thing in the territory, because of the water. Because of the water, and because of what the water could give people. William thought about that. Life, hope, a future. The boy nodded seriously. "When I'm grown up, I want to take care of it too." Nate felt his chest tighten. "I know you will. Will you teach me everything great-grandpa taught you?" "I will. I promise." William looked out over the canyon, at the buildings, the fields, the creek running full and clear, the families working together. "It's beautiful here." "It is. I'm glad great-grandpa gave it to you." "So am I." Nate stood. put his hand on his son's shoulder. Together they watched the sun sink lower, painting everything gold. "Come on," Nate said. "Your mother will have supper ready." They walked down the ridge together, father and son, just like Ezra and Nate had once walked, before everything changed, before loss and distance and grief. And Nate understood now. Finally, completely, what his father had been trying to give him, not just land, not just water, but the chance to build something that would last, something bigger than one man, bigger than one lifetime, a legacy of care, of community, of people helping each other survive, in a world that was often too hard to survive alone. That night after William was asleep, Nate sat at the table, Elizabeth mending beside him, the fire crackling softly. He pulled out his father's letters, read them again, as he did every few months, to remember, to stay grounded, to remind himself why this all mattered. Trust the cabin, Nate, trust the land, and for God's sake, don't sell it. He smiled, folded the letters, put them back in their box. "What are you thinking?" Elizabeth asked. "That my father was smarter than I ever gave him credit for. He was a wise man. He was a man who knew what mattered and wasn't afraid to fight for it. Like someone else I know." Nate looked at her. This woman he'd married. This life they'd built. "I'm just finishing what he started." "No," Elizabeth set down her mending. "You're building on what he started. There's a difference." She was right, as usual. Ezra had given him the foundation. But Nate had built the house. And William would add to it. And William's children after that, generation after generation, building, growing, protecting. That was the real inheritance, not gold, not land, but the responsibility to care for something bigger than yourself, to pass it on better than you received it, to make sure that 40 acres and a rusted key could become a home for hundreds, a life for thousands, a legacy that would outlast them all. Nate stood, walked to the window, looked out at the canyon, at the lights flickering in the windows of the houses below, at the smoke rising from chimneys, at the life continuing, even in darkness. "Thank you, Pa," he whispered. The wind carried his words away, up into the mountains, where maybe somehow Ezra Bridger could hear them and smile, because his son had understood, finally, what it meant to inherit something worth keeping, and the courage it took to protect it, not just for yourself, but for everyone, forever.